boy cleared out for the city from his farm around harvest time. They were Scots of the Riverina, and to run from home was a crime. The old man burned his letters, the first and last he burned, and scratched his name from the Bible while the old girl's back was turned. A year went by, then another. There were calls from the firing line. They'd heard the boy had enlisted, but the old man gave no sign, for his name must never be mentioned in that farm by Gundagai. Scots of the Riverina, with ever the church hard by. When the boy came home for his final, the township's bonfires burned. His mother's arms were around him, while the old man's back was turned. The daughters begged for pardon, but the old man raised his hand. A Scot of the Riverina, he was hard to understand. Well, the boy was killed at Flanders, where the bravest heroes died. There were tears in the Graham homestead, there was grief in Gundagai. And the old man ploughed from daybreak, and he ploughed into the murk. There were furrows of pain in the orchard, and the household went to the church. A hurricane lamp in the rafters dimly burned, and the old man died at the table while the old girl's back was turned. Face down and his bare arms folded, he sank into his wild grey hair. On the table an open Bible with a name rewritten there. G'day and welcome to this Fred Smith Anzac Day special brought to you by Soldiers, Songs and Voices. That was a song called Scots of the River, or rather it was a poem originally written by Henry Lawson 100 years ago, set to music by John Sheeran. I like to sing it because I think it's an extraordinary piece of writing and the grandfather of a tradition of Australians at war songs that has since been followed up on by the likes of Eric Bogle, John Schumann, Don Walker. I'd like to think I've made my own contribution to that genre by way of a small little collection of songs I've written about Australian whole-of-government stabilisation interventions in fragile and conflict-affected states. It's a niche market, but you've got to write about what you know about, and I have spent a bit of time in recent years working overseas on Australian government missions in Solomons, Bougainville Island, and most recently Afghanistan. I went over to Afghanistan in 2009 when the international community, NATO countries, started sending diplomats in to work alongside soldiers out in the provinces of Afghanistan. I rocked up there in July 2009. I'm a musician, I just go places, I rock up. And I quickly discovered three things about Uruzgan province. The first was it was incredibly dusty, this fine bloody dust that just went everywhere. And the second thing I discovered after attending the RSO and I course, the Reception Staging and Onwards Integration course at Ali Al Salam, and then moving onward to CAF, Kandahar Airfield, and the following morning I flew on a Dutch plane to the MNBTK, the multinational base Tarankout. By the time I reached the MNBTK, I quickly came to the conclusion that the ADF had turned the MEO, the Middle Eastern Area of Operations, into an ARE, an acronym-rich environment. Seriously, there were TLAs coming out of people's RSCs. You had a bunch of guys there working for 1RAR, the 1st Royal Australian Regiment from Townsville. Within the MRTF, the Mentoring and Reconstruction Task Force, they were out there living on FOBs, forward operating bases, COPS, combat outposts, observing SOPs, standard operating procedures, TTPs, tactics, training and procedures, avoiding where possible AP mines, anti-personnel mines, IEDs, improvised explosive devices. Then within the IED category you had PPIEDs, pressure plate initiated IEDs, VBIEDs, vehicle-borne IEDs, DBIEDs, donkey-borne IEDs. The Taliban, very innovative in the use of these improvised weapons, including daisy chain arrangements where one bomb might be connected to another by detonation cord. And that was the third thing I discovered pretty quickly. This combination of the IEDs and the dust that concealed them was actually deadly. On my first day in theatre, I attended a memorial service funeral, a ramp service for a young soldier named Ben Ronaldo, killed on the morning of the 18th of July by an IED up in the Baluchi Valley. I was pretty shocked because I'd never seen this sort of thing before, but anyway. I went on to work in the MRTF headquarters in an office which I shared with the commanding tactical officer and occasionally with colonels who had passed through the area of operations to conduct investigations. And in August of 2009, I shared that shipping container for 3 days with a Colonel Mark Frendon, who'd come through to investigate the death of Ben Ronaldo the month before. He didn't stay long before heading up to Combat Outpost Marshall and then onwards to Germany to finalise his investigations. Now, we never got the outcome of that report until December that year. I remember when I read it, I was pretty taken not only by Ben's story but also by a second soldier named Paul Warren, a former Thai boxer and Queensland champion, who was also involved in the incident. And I began to see the situation from Paul's point of view, and pretty soon afterwards I wrote this song called The Dust of Uruzgan.
In the ring they call me Warlord, my mother call me Paul. You can call me Private Warren when you're filing your report. As to how I came to be here, this is what I understand. In this hospital in Germany from the dust of Uruzgan. Well, I had just turned 28 and just bought a new car when I joined the 1st Battalion of the Big 1 RAR. And we were next up for deployment into South Afghanistan to combat the insurgents in the dust of Uruzgan. Well, it took 7 months of training just to get into the joint. There were push-ups and procedures, and there was death by PowerPoint. And then the RSO and I course in Ali Al-Salam. But nothing can prepare you for the dust of Uruzgan. Me and Betty sat together, flying into Kandahar, and sucked back on our near beers in the Camp Baker bar. We were up at 05:30 and on the Hurricane out in 20 flying minutes, and we were into Taran Count. We shook hands as the boys ripped out from MRTF1. Pretty soon we're out patrolling in the Afghan summer sun, walking through the green zones with a stire in my hand, body armor chafing through the dust of Uruzgan. Well, we started up near Chora, working 14 hours a day, mentoring a Kandak from the Afghan 4th Brigade, down to the Baluchi into Eastern Dorashan, working under open skies in the dust of Uruzgan. Well, it's a long, long way from Townsville, not like any place you'll see. Suddenly you're walking through the 14th century. Women under burqas and tribal warlords rule the land. Full of goats and muck and jingle trucks is the dust of Uruzgan. And the education minister can neither read nor write. And the minister for women runs a knock shop there at night. They've been fighting there forever over water, food and land, murdering each other in the dust of Uruzgan. Yeah, there's nothing about the province that's remotely fair or just, but worse than the corruption is the endless fucking dust, fine as talcum powder on the ground and in the air, and it gets into your eyes, and it gets into your hair, and it gets into your weapon, and it gets into your boots, and when the bureaucrats all show up there, it gets into their suits, gets in the machinery and foils every plan. Well, there's something quite symbolic about the dust of Uruzgan. Still, the people can be gracious, and and they're courteous and smart. And when the children look into your eyes, they walk into your heart. Face each day with courage, and each year without a plan, beyond scratching for survival in the dust of Uruzgan. But the Taliban are ruthless, keep the people terrorised, with roadside bombs and hangings and leaving letters in the night. And they have no useful vision for the children of this land, but to keep them praying on their knees in the dust of Uruzgan. Well, it was a quiet Saturday morning when the two-shop made a call on a compound of interest to the east of Kopmashal. We had some information that they were building IEDs, and so we cordoned and we searched it in accord with SOPs. I was on the west flank picket, propped there with Ben, there to keep a watchful eye out while the other blokes went in. And we knew the signs of danger from the TTPs we'd learned, but the Nationals were moving back and forth without concern. I've been standing still for hours when I took a quick step back and kicked a small AP mine, and everything went black. I woke up on the gurney, flat out on my back. I had to ask him 7 times just to get the facts, that I lived to tell this story through a simple twist of fate. The main charge lay 10 feet away from the pressure plate. You see, the mine was linked by det cord to a big charge laid by hand, hidden under Benny by the dust of Uruzgan. I was a Queensland champ Thai boxer. Now I look south of my knee, and all I see is bed sheets where my right foot used to be. Benny's dead and buried underneath Australian sand, but his spirit's out there wandering through the dust. Through the dust of Uruzgan. It's the city of my birth, and some go back to Ballarat, and some go back to Perth. I've been living with my mother, who's still trying to understand why we're spending blood and treasure in the dust.
That song, Dust of Uruzgan, is really a story about 2 soldiers. But I think it paints a kind of broader picture of the situation there in Uruzgan for our soldiers trying to work in that environment. The challenges, the dust, which I might have mentioned once or twice, the heat, difficult tribal politics, the ambiguity of the situation, and of course the IEDs, the bombs in the road or on the side of the track. These were the Taliban's main weapon against us, often sort of improvised devices made out of the sort of stuff you might be able to buy in Bunnings, a pressure cooker, a WIPOC, a yellow palm oil container filled with phosphate fertilizer, triggered by a garage door opener or a string, or a pressure plate made out of saws. Pretty rough and ready, but deadly enough. Indeed, 80% of the people killed by these IEDs were Afghans and not foreign troops, but they did enough damage to our troops that meant that we could never really move freely around the countryside, and meant that we could never really go outside the wire without the protection of sappers. Sappers is combat engineers. It's a term for combat engineers, and their job in Afghanistan and indeed Iraq was to travel at the front of patrols with a sniffer dog and metal detector, inching forward, travelling at sort of 2 meters in a minute, very carefully surveying the ground for the bombs in the road. or anything suspicious on the side of the track that might look like a bomb. Very dangerous work, of course, and we lost 7 sappers in our time in southern Afghanistan, including 2 on the morning of the 7th of June. I remember that morning. I was working in my office there in the MRTF headquarters, and I heard a call come from the command post down the corridor. 2 Category A's, send choppers. Category A is the worst kind of injury, needing to be treated within an hour, else fatality. And of course the choppers were sent, but by the time they arrived, Darren Smith and Jacob Morland were dead, as was their dog, Herbie. And so they brought the boys' remains back to the wrtoe hospital, and 2 days later we had a ramp ceremony, a memorial service, a funeral there on the base. Basically we all filed into the Apache aircraft hangar and sat there staring at the caskets in front of us. The padre led the service. The guys' mates got up and talked about what they were like at home, on the footy field, at the pub, their girlfriends, etc. And you sat there with your mates, but alone with your thoughts, just looking at those caskets and feeling the pain of the family back home that just got a visit from the notifying officer. Anyway, when the service was done, the guy's mates would pick up the casket and put it on the back of a gun car, and the rest of us, 3,000 Australian soldiers, Afghans, Americans, Dutch, would line the dusty road out past the wrtoe hospital to the flight line where the Hercules aircraft awaited, and the Herc would take the caskets home. And then we'd go back to work. And so I went to that ramp ceremony for Snowy and Smithy on the morning of the 9th of June. And that afternoon I went back to my office. Instead of writing the cable I was supposed to write, I wrote a song called The Sapper's Lullaby. We had a little band on the bass and we rehearsed it the following evening out the back of the quartermaster's store and played it that weekend at a concert at the barbecue area of Poppies. Here's The Sapper's Lullaby.
Up from the wrtoe and down past the gate, out to the flight line. We stood in the sun with slouch hat and gun as 2 caskets passed us by, and followed the padre onto the Herc and out into the pale summer sky. We walked back to Poppies, then went back to work with the dust still in our eyes. So soldiers, sing me your sapper's lullaby. You give it your all, knowing if you should fall, that all good things must die. These young engineers, whose job is to clear the road so we may pass, they're always out front, and when they bear the brunt, man, it happens fast. Sapper D. Smith had a wife and a son, the apple of his eye. Snowy Moreland was just 21, way too young to die. So soldiers, sing me your sapper's lullaby. You give it your all, knowing if you should fall, that all good things must die. Go call your mother, call your old man on that welfare line and tell him you love him while you still can, 'cause all good things must die. Soldiers, sing me your sapper's lullaby. You give it your all, knowing if you should fall, that all good things must die. All good things must die.
That was the beginning of a very difficult summer for Australian troops in Uruzgan province, starting with the deaths of Snowy and Smithy on the 7th of June. And in the 2 months that followed, we lost another 8 soldiers, which was a kind of unprecedented spike in the casualty rates for Australians working in Afghanistan. In retrospect, there were a few things going on. 20,000 American Marines had surged in neighbouring Helmand province, as a consequence of which about 500 Taliban fighters had flowed across the border and got active in Uruzgan. But also a certain psychological opportunity had been created for the Taliban by confusion around the future of the Dutch presence in the province of Uruzgan. The Dutch had been working there since 2006, and they were the lead nation. They had 2,000 soldiers and 20 civilians, and had committed heavily to the province. But they were on 2-year tenures from the Dutch Parliament, and it was uncertain whether they would continue into a third tenure. I mean, we'd worked very closely with the Dutch right throughout the time, and generally speaking, we got on pretty well with the Dutch troops, but there were a couple of cultural problems, I would say. One was the fierce proclivity of the Dutchmen for wearing lycra. You couldn't stop them, it was unforgivable. But the second was a Dutch cultural practice known as swaffelen. I don't know if you've heard of swaffelen. I'd never heard of it before I went over there, but when I showed up there, one of the Aussie soldiers came up to me and said, "Hey Fred, you got to do something about those Dutchies, they keep swaffling in the Dixies." I said, "No worries, leave it with me, I'll get right onto it." I didn't know what it meant. And so I asked one of my counterparts, a Dutch diplomat named Alex Oostwyk. I said, "Alex, what's this swaffling business?" He said, "Oh, it's a Dutch cultural practice." I said, "Yeah, mate, but what does it mean?" He said, "Oh, it just simply means to swing your penis backwards and forwards and pop it up against something." I said, "Is this common in Holland?" He said, "Oh yes, more so amongst the men than the women." I said, "How did it become so popular?" He said, "Well, it became very popular through YouTube. You see, 2 Dutch tourists film one another swaffling the Taj Mahal." Anyway, it turns out that the footage went onto YouTube, went viral, and started a whole craze of Dutch tourists travelling around the world swaffling national monuments like the Eiffel Tower and the Sphinx and the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the Big Banana in Coffs Harbour. And of course, all this got me very worried. I mean, we'd spent a lot of money on counter-terrorism over the years, but what had we done to counter the swaffling threat? Nothing. And so I sent a cable back to Canberra, recommending a series of countermeasures, including biometric testing at the border for Dutch tourists and passing an electric current through the Sydney Harbour Bridge. My cable was not well received, but we had a more immediate problem on the base insofar as the Dutch soldiers were swaffling in the Dixies. The Dixies were the blue plastic portaloos that proliferated around the base. And of course, for the Australian soldiers, these were the dunnies. This was sacred space. This is where your digger writes his poetry. The future of Australian war poetry was at stake. I had to do something about it, and so I wrote the following song called Niet Swaffelen op the Dixie, which is Dutch for "Don't swing your dick in the portaloo." And here's a footage of me playing the song to the Dutch Brigadier Mark van Oom.
I've heard that when the Taliban held power in Kabul, they messed up people's lives with lots of silly rules. Women were illegal, and so was flying kites. And God defend the kind of men who like to dress in tights. I don't want to sound like Taliban and tell you what to do. I'm fighting here for freedom after all, just like you. I respect your lowlands culture and I love you very much. But there is one important thing I say to all you Dutch. Yet, shuffling up the Dixie, it's against the law. Yet, shuffling up the Dixie, we're trying to fight a war. And if you're shuffling in that Dixie like a Dixie shuffling man, how the hell are we supposed to defeat the Taliban? So you're shuffling up the Dixie, knit, 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 shuffling up the Dixie. It really isn't cool. Knit, shuffling up the Dixie. It's against the rules. You know it's in the ISAFRAGO, it's in the UCP, that Dixies are strictly for poo and pee. So knit, shuffling up the Dixie. Knit, 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 shuffling up the Dixie. There isn't enough room. If I hear that you've been shuffling in that Dixie, Sebastian, I will tell Brigadier Van Oom, and he'll have you court-martialed and sent back to The Hague, where they'll put your dick on a table and whack it with a spade. So knit, shuffling up the Dixie. Knit, 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 shuffling up the Dixie. It really isn't fair, 'cause there are people who need to use those Dixies, and you could shuffle anywhere. You could shuffle in Paris, you could shuffle in Rome, you could shuffle in the Taj Mahal, or wait till you get home. You could shuffle in the shower blocks with shampoo or soap. You could shuffle with the civ rep or with the fucking Pope. But knit, shuffling up the Dixie. Knit, 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 shuffling up the Dixie. Did you hear me? Or are you deaf? If I hear that you've been shuffling in that Dixie, I will call in the SF. Task Force 55 and the boys from 66 go shuffling at night with black paint on their dicks. And if they hear that you've been shuffling in that Dixie, my friend, they will hard knock on the Dixie door, in which case I would recommend that you immediately bend over, place your chest upon your thigh, stick your head between your knees, and kiss your ass goodbye. Shuffling up the Dixie. Knit, 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 song. Knit, 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 shuffling up the Dixie. Knit, knit, knit. Oh, this is to remind me to play the song to the Brigadier. I remembered. Knit, one more verse. Knit, shuffling up the Dixie. It really is gross. You know, once a week they clean those Dixies with a great big vacuum hose. And if you're shuffling in that Dixie on a lazy Saturday, you may find yourself fellatioed in the most unpleasant way. It'll grab you, it'll suck you, till there is nothing left. And what's the BDA gonna say about your cause of death? That you died shuffling in the Dixie. Knit, knit, knit.
Yeah.
So anyway, the Dutch cabinet met 17 times to try to decide whether to continue their mission in Uruzgan, and after that 17 meetings they decided they couldn't decide. And so the Dutch ruling coalition collapsed. An election was called. It caused a change of government in Holland, and the net result was the termination of the Dutch mission in Uruzgan. And throughout the summer of 2010, the Dutch troops were preparing to leave, and morale was very low amongst the Dutch soldiers. They felt that leaders had let them down by pulling them out so quickly. It improved in early July, though, when Holland got into the World Cup soccer final. This was the summer of 2010. World Cup was being held in South Africa at the time. The Dutch got into the final for the third time, having lost the previous 2 times they got into the World Cup final. And of course the Dutch soldiers were really excited about this. They're moderately interested in soccer in Holland. And so on the evening of the 11th of July, they all filed into Poppies, where they had a screen up on the wall and projected the final in live from, I think, Durban. And it was a torrid, defensive affair, the World Cup final. 11 yellow cards during regular time compared to a previous record of 6. By full time, the score was 0-0, and the situation was very tense. Extra time rolled on, penalty shootout looming until, with 3 minutes to go, the Spanish centre Andres Iniesta drilled a sneaky Spanish goal. And the Dutch were broken-hearted. So I had to do something to cheer them up, so I put on a concert, since that's my solution to most problems. Put together a little band with the new Aussie quartermaster and the Dutch legal officer and a couple of nurses. And we performed down Poppies on the evening of the 17th of July, and there were about 100 Aussies up towards the back, about 70-odd Dutchmen towards the front. And I sang the Dust of Uruzgan song, and they seemed to enjoy that, and Sapper's Lullaby. A lot of people had been there at the time of that ramp ceremony. And then I played the first 5 verses of the Neat Swafflin and the Dixie song, which they seemed to enjoy, so I got some wind up and wrote a final verse on the spot there, just to thank the Dutch for their contribution to the province.
Well, my friends now from Holland, you're leaving. I know you've made this plan, because swaffling is now legal here in Uruzgan. But when you're back in Holland, you can swaffle what you like. You can swaffle in a windmill, you can swaffle in a dike, you can swaffle in a hash pipe in Leiden or Cologne, but you can't swaffle the World Cup because the fucking thing's in Spain.
So anyway, over that summer of 2010, the Dutch were progressively withdrawing from the base. 2,000 of them leaving, while 1,000 Americans came in to replace them. The early symptoms of this transition were the appearance of TV screens in the dining facility. American soldiers don't like to eat breakfast without cage fighting on television. The second thing we noticed was that the Americans started to put pavements all around the hitherto rocky and dusty base as part of an operation we called OEF, Operation Enduring Footpath. But the third consequence was more serious for me. The Dutch had done a pretty rigorous job on the political and development side. They had political offices, not only in the provincial capital of Dera Pet, but also out west in Dera district and up north in Chora. And with the elections looming, we needed a political presence at these outer bases, and so it was in early August of 2010 that I was sent up to work as a political officer at Forward Operating Base Mirwais in the Chora Valley. A beautiful valley it was, with the river running through the middle and a kind of green agricultural strip irrigated by sluices and aqueducts in the middle. And this forward operating base was of course much smaller than the main base in Dera Pet, but we could still add forward acronyms. We had an LZ, a landing zone, a CP, a command post, an OC, an officer commanding, a major named Justin Roderick, who was responsible for operations out of that forward operating base, but also for the combat outposts down the valley, Combat Outpost Mashal, Boomen, Khyber. And the base was populated by about 200 Afghan soldiers, about 40 American soldiers, half of whom's job was to protect me, and then about 60 Australian soldiers who would move up and down from FOB Mirwais to the combat outposts in the valley. These guys were from 6RAR, Brisbane-based Nogra Barracks. Of course, 6RAR fought in the Battle of Long Tan. And so it was that on the morning of the 18th of August, in commemoration of that battle, we had a little ceremony. I mean, we didn't have a bugle player up there, so they tapped me to play the harmonica. I looked it up on the internet and got the notes and played it the next morning on the harp at that ceremony. It was a nice thing to do. Doesn't sound too bad on the harmonica. Anyway, when I arrived at the forward operating base, I was initially a bit of an outsider. You know, those guys had been there 6 months and they were thick as thieves. But being an outsider gave me a sense of empathy for the military police, who are legendary in the army for having no mates. And I particularly felt for the MP when he showed up on the 20th of August that year. He had a particularly difficult job to do. This is a song I wrote called August 20. An August summer's day, a morning clear and bright, a week after Ramadan, the lines were nice and quiet, the sappers were away, and from the tent next door, some boys were down in the valley, on an op at Cockmashaw. I went to find my terp, to call a district chief, and walked past the Afghan's kitchen and stuck my head in the CP, where I heard a call come in from India 3-6 through the static of the icon, saying something about a tick, another IED, and a couple of category A's. Mod called in a medivac, and I got out of the way. I went up to my desk to write up a report of a conversation that I had had the day before. Willie wandered in to call his Mrs. Dear. We found that the phones were cut, confirming what I'd feared. Two choppers circled in from Tarancout, they said, through the Chora saddle to our dirt and stone LZ. The MP got off first. He'd done all this before. A brick of boys got on the bird to reinforce my shore. When the MP came around, but then it was 3:30, those who'd stayed from the tent next door helped him with his inventories, packed all their effects, less pornos and their fags, ready for Sunday's chopper in white painted echelon bags. I went back to the CP for the 17:30 brief. The staff were sitting quietly. The room was thick with grief, till Dixie arced up red, saying, "Let's go settle scores." And the OC said, "We keep our heads and crack on like before." And all through dinner time, and that evening, warm and still, quiet speculation about what happened on that hill, till Willie briefed the team and laid the facts out cold, then went through the orders for the next day's foot patrol. That song, August 20, reflects on the mood that swept through the forward operating base Mirwais on the afternoon of the 20th of August 2010, when we heard the news that two of the guys from the tent next door to mine, Grant Kirby and Thomas Dale, had been killed down in the Bellucci Valley. 3 days later, on the 23rd of August, I got on the chopper with their bags, their effects painted white to distinguish them, and flew down to Tarankout, to the main base there. And the following morning, the 24th of August, I attended their ramp service there in the Apache aircraft hangar. And I remember we came out of that ramp service to hear that another Australian soldier had been killed that morning. Basically what happened was a squad of soldiers had left the base in Tarankout while the ramp ceremony was going on, headed west into the Dera district, married up with another bunch of soldiers from the patrol base called Anna Joy, and turned back west again and marched towards a village called Dera Pet, where there was known to be a concentration of Taliban. Now, our soldiers working there in southern Afghanistan operated under rules of engagement which prohibited them from shooting at the Taliban unless and until they shot at us. So because of that, our guys developed this tactic of marching into enemy-controlled territory and waiting to get shot at, which seems like a dumb idea, except that we were better armed and at least we could identify them that way. And so that's what happened on the morning of the 24th of August. A combined patrol of Australian and Afghan soldiers marched towards this village of Dera Pet. And as they grew closer, they waited and waited, and eventually, bang, the ambush went off. We thought we'd be up against a dozen or so Taliban. In fact, there were 100 of them, and the Taliban were well positioned, ready for the ambush, hidden behind a tree line. And our guys were in deep trouble, pinned down and running out of ammunition. Eventually, we prevailed through the force of the gun cars we had positioned up on the hill, the ASLAVs, the Apaches that came in, and through an act of courage by a soldier named Dan Kieran, which really seemed to turn the battle. And in the end, we probably won that battle, but we lost this soldier, Jared McKinney. And so 3 days later, I was attending a ramp service for this Jared, known to his mates as Crash. And I remember listening to the commanding officer talk about what had happened in the course of the battle and thinking to myself, this bloke deserves a song written about him. It took me a while to get around to it. I mean, I got back to worked through that summer, into the winter, came back to Australia in 2011, recorded the Dust of Uruzgan album, released it, toured it, and I was resting from all this activity in my home in June 2012 when I got an email one night from a soldier who'd just got out of the army. A lot of boys were getting out back then and going to work in the mines. It was the middle of the mining boom, and his email read, "G'day Fred, you don't know me, but I saw you when you came through to entertain the troops back in 2010. I thought, entertain the troops? Bloody hell, I was working." Anyway, his email went on to say, "We lost a lot of guys that summer, your songs helped, but can you write one for Crash McKinney?" And I got back to him immediately saying, "Yeah, well, I've been meaning to do that. Tell me what happened that day." But he went cold on me, didn't respond. I thought I must have been too forward. Anyway, in the early 2013, I went back to Uruzgan because I knew it'd be the last 6 months of the mission. I wanted to see how things would end. And I was there one night, one August evening, after dinner, walking along, and I walked past the memorial wall they'd built for all the soldiers, Australians, Americans, and Dutch who had perished in Uruzgan province. And I saw a little group of guys standing over near the memorial wall, sipping surreptitiously from plastic cups. And the Padre, Al Lavaki, was with them, and Al had been the Padre who'd supervised all those ramp services in 2010. So I went over and said, "Hey Al, what's going on?" And he said, 24th of August, anniversary of Crash's death. And I said, "So it is." And so I went back to my office and I emailed that soldier who'd emailed me the year before. I said, "Hey mate, what's going on? I just ran into some of your pals." And he got back to me that night. And he apologized for going cold on me. And then he told me what happened on the day, in the morning of the 24th of August, from his point of view. And I wrote this song pretty soon afterwards.
You looking hungry, cobber? You plant your ass down, mate. Would you like some mashed potato with that burger on your plate? It's been another long shift here at the Cooper Petey mess, but if you got a minute, I've got something on my chest. It was the 24th of August, back in 2010. I was working out of Taran Cout with a squad of 20 men. The Dutch had pulled the pin, leaving Uruzgan for good. It fell to us to fill the void out to the west in Derawood. It had been a lethal summer. Starting back in June, we'd lost Smithy, Snowy, Applin, Palmer, Chucky, and then Buse. August took down Jason, Brown, and Curbs and Thomas Dale. On the morning of their service, we set out en route whale. I was carrying the Maximize, the thumping belt-fed gun, with an action like a jackhammer. The weapon weighed a ton. We drove south of the Tangi to an RV where we met with 2 brick of boys from Anna Joy, and we turned for Dera Pet. Lance Jack McKinney, the boys all called him Crash. He was the fastest bastard that we all knew, for distance or for dash. A soldier's bloody soldier, and the fittest man I've met. I was proud to march beside him on approach to Dera Pet. 60 clicks out in the sticks to the west of Taran Cout. The sappers saw the fams move in and the women all clear out. A tick was what we wanted, a tick was what we'd get. It was only a matter of when and where there in the fields of Dera Pet. Me and Crash were partnered in reserve back at the rear. And though we weren't at point that day, I smelt and felt the fear. The boys kept probing forward through the aqueduct and sluice, till from a nearby tree line I could see all hell break loose. They'd hit a complex ambush of about 100 men. There was the chattering of AKs and the thud of PKMs. The rounds were whistling around them, but we couldn't tell where from, because the Taliban had concealment in the tree line and the corn. And then a call came on the ICOM to come forward from the back. They needed my machine gun up at the front of the attack. So me and Crash, we hoofed it as the rounds around us cracked, running with that weapon and my armour and my pack. We'd come 600 metres through the muddy aqueduct, and by the time we reached the front line, frankly I was fucked. My mind said keep going, but my body just said nope, and I collapsed back on my pack at the bottom of the slope. Crash grabbed the Maximi and he hauled it up to the crest. That's why he was where he was when the round burst through his chest. I looked up in that instant, and I never will forget, as he spun around and crashed face down in the dust of Dera Pet. Wooly called for dust off. We were too far from the cars. We worked on Crash for an hour, taking turns on CPR. The chopper came and medevaced him back into TK, where the doctor at the roll 2 declared him DOA. Meanwhile, Keegran broke cover, dancing dangerous and strange. 100 Talib muzzles flashed as the Aslavs found their range between those gun cars, the Apache and the M777. Many Talibs became martyrs with their virgins up in heaven. The battle soon was over. They had lost their will to fight. They left their dead and dying. They'd pick them up that night. We walked back to the Aslavs and crawled into the fob. I remember sitting quietly with Langers, Sean and Rob. Fanners ran the section through an after-action brief. I tuned in, though exhausted, I was numb with shame and grief. The BDA said, by the way, there's 30 of them dead, and so they say we won the day in the Battle of Dera Pet. Becky's waters broke at the crematorium. A few hours later, she gave birth to his son. The boys help out with the mowing, and she got some compo cash. Helps pay the bills, but it won't fill the hole where once was crash. And Langer's won selection. Daniel Keegren got a gong. Abbott won the election, and Fred Smith got his song. Those who get these accolades deserve all that they get, but Crash did not deserve to die at the Battle of Dera Pet. And I moved back to Brisbane and got out on Civvy Street. Now I'm working in this mine, mate, in this mess where miners eat. I'm married now with children to a woman named Regret. It's the price you pay for a summer's day in the fields of Dera Pet.
So that was Dera Pet, a song I wrote about that difficult summer in 2010, but I wrote it in the summer of 2013 when I was back in Uruzgan province for the last 6 months of the mission. It was a very interesting sort of and kind of eerie time there. It was quiet from a fighting point of view. Our soldiers had come in from the forward operating bases into the provincial capital Tarankout as part of the process of transitioning responsibility for security to the Afghan forces, leaving them out at the checkpoints and the forward operating bases and the combat outposts. And so as the summer wore on, we were watching those checkpoints to see whether the soldiers that we'd mentored for the last 6 years could protect them from the Taliban, which could, and in the event did, swarm to attack them. But back on the base in Tarankout, it was a matter of sort of packing up the base, a process they call retrograde, into ever-decreasing circles of razor wire, and putting them on planes and going home. And it was sort of melancholy for me. I'd spent 2 years, it was like a little town I got to know, and suddenly we were all going. But for many soldiers, it was also a time of coming to terms with the sort of fact that the process we'd been involved in, the combat, the operations, was about to come to an end and we'd have to go home. And for many, I think that would be a difficult transition. It is a difficult transition back from a war zone into the domestic environment. And this is a song I wrote called Going Home, which stares that in the eye.
Underneath these northern stars, picking on a mate's guitar, with a breeze from Kandahar blowing soft and warm. See, my own is in its case, with the movers just off base, on a pallet bound for space. Now I'm going home. Fighting season got underway after harvest back in May, with attacks in Chardonnay and Charmastone. But the checkpoints all have held. It wasn't pretty, but oh well. Let them do it all themselves. Now let's go home. Don't get out too much these days with the bass in retrograde. This trip hasn't been the guns of Navarone, and nothing like my first go round out in the valleys round for round. 40 good men in the ground, now we're gone home. And up on Kabul streets I hear they've got billboards everywhere of the Lion of Panjshir or a 3G phone. Meanwhile down here in TK, they're banking on MK, and they're fighting 4th Brigade, 'cause we're going home. I don't know how I'm gonna fit back home. Been out here now so long, this is what I know. Brother, thanks for your ear. Life is easier out here. It's loving family I fear. Now I'm gone home. Hear the mullah sing his song at the rising of the sun. Shares his love for everyone through a megaphone. By the time this sings again, I'll be on that bird, my friend. This war is at an end, now I'm gone home.
Well, thanks very much for taking the time to view and listen to this Anzac Day specials, edited by Soldiers, Songs and Voices, which is an organisation that works to help soldiers process their experiences through songwriting workshops. There's a donation button somewhere around here. If you've got some spare change, please donate. These songs are on an album called Dust of Uruzgan, and another one I released recently called Warwies. Look them up on my website, fredsmith.com.au. And thanks for listening to these stories. I mean, they concentrate really on that period, that summer, that northern summer of 2010. The Australian troops working there, our experiences. There are so many stories from that summer which I don't have time to tell. There are so many stories from our involvement in Afghanistan. There's not time to tell. I mean, there's so many stories from the whole history of Australian participation in conflicts overseas, from the First World War to the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, and all the smaller stabilisation missions we've been involved in since. Too many stories for me to tell, but I hope you can take a bit of time on Anzac Day to reflect on these, to explore them, if only to understand the experiences of the generations and generations of soldiers and young Australians overseas. I suppose in all but one of those conflicts we've been really fighting other people's wars. I mean, we went into the First World War with great enthusiasm and, to my mind, a level of naivety about the full horror of war. I think if we learned anything over the last 100 years, it's to be very circumspect about what we get involved in. For me, it's a transition from naivety to a greater sense of knowingness, and that's what I've captured in this next song. It's called Century Girl. Thanks again for listening.
I'm gonna have to introduce myself. I got no record company, produce myself alone. I've been the drummer and I played the bass. Now I'm up front with my pretty little face on. I kept it together through the lean years. I sang stormy weather through the main years. I've been the sucker of the century, and now I'm the fucker I was meant to be. Born at the turn of the century, I fought in the trenches at Gallipoli. I stood tall when Wall Street crashed, though I never ever had a lot of cash. I fought in the beaches of the Second War. I landed with MacArthur at Corregidor. And my ass got burned when Saigon fell. Re-education was another kind of hell. Century girl, I'm checking out. Is there much left for us to talk about? I'll call back in from planet Earth. The self-same child who was upon my birth. Well, I've been a sailor at the 7 seas. I was a hippie in the 70s. I shot the sheriff and I fought the law. Been the hooker to the whore, you know. And I've been Catholic and I've been Zen. Been the Buddha since Christ knows when. I've been to Babylon, I've been to Rome. I've been traveling, but now I'm home. Century girl, I'm checking out. Is there much left for us to talk about? I'll call back in from planet Earth. The self-same child who was upon my birth. Seen a bucket load of shit go down. Been the president, I've been the clown. I've seen a bucket of futility. I don't need to demonstrate virility. Still I ain't bitter and I ain't green, and I'm feeling fitter than I ever been. I've been the sucker of the century, and now I'm the fucker I was meant to be. Century girl, I'm checking out. Is there much left for us to talk about? I'll call back in from planet Earth. The self-same child who was upon my birth. Century girl, I'm checking out. Is there much left for us to talk about? I'll call back in from planet Earth. The self-same child who was upon my birth. Thank you very much. Good night.